All right, guys. So where we left off last time, we had looked at a little bit at the beginning of doing some problems involving circumference. And you remember that the formula for circumference was just the the diameter times pi. That's how we looked at it there. We said if you take the diameter, like in this example, you see the diameter is 46 millimeters. If I take that diameter and multiply it by pi, which here we see with a whole bunch of decimal places, then that'll give me the circumference. Right, so let's start off by doing this example here right now, because this was one similar to the ones we saw in the last worksheet. If I've got a diameter of 46 millimeters and I want to get the circumference, I type in 46, I multiply that by pi, and then I'll get the number, which is correct to a whole bunch of decimal places. Before I write my answer at the very end, I check and I round to the last two decimal places, but I only do that at the very end, right? I know in some of the videos we see sometimes it says something like, oh, just take your diameter and then multiply it by 3.14. And then in this case you get 144.44, and so that's what you'd put your answer as being. That's not what I want you to do. I want you to find the actual number by doing 46 times the actual pi, and then using that. See how this is a different result than if I just used 3.14? So use the pi button on your calculator for all of these. And then once you get a final answer here at the end, now when I'm writing down what my answer is, I round it to two decimal places. So I get 144.51 millimeters is my circumference here, right? And so what that ends up looking like here, if I type this here, what's going on, I say, okay, so this is how I want you guys to show your work. You say, you got, all right, circumference is equal to pi, you can use, if you can write the pi thing, that's even better, times diameter, right? So you got your formula here, and then you put in what you know. I know that, well, I don't know the circumference, but I know that it's pi times 46 millimeters, right? So that's my line here, and then in my calculator, I did the calculations, and the number that I got was 144.51. So I write in my answer here, circumference equals 144, oops, that's a bit too much, 0.51, and I put the units. I always have to have those units in my final answer, like that. And then, of course, to make sure that it's clear that that's my final answer, I'm going to circle that or put a nice square around it or something to show that I've got it. All right. Let me just get something else lined up here before I go further. Okay. So that's the formula we saw before. You take the diameter, you multiply it by pi, and that gives you your circumference. And we know that's why pi is the letter P in the Greek alphabet. It's pi for P for perimeter. The perimeter of the circle, which is what the circumference is, times the diameter. Now, in this page here that you have in front of you, you see there's a little bit different formula, which always works as well. You see, it's just circumference equals 2 pi r. You might be saying, well, I thought the circumference was equal to pi times the diameter. What's this nonsense of the radius? The answer is, well, since every diameter is always just two radii back to back, like this here, you see this is like a radius of 23 and another radius of 23 together make a diameter of 46. I can also just take the radius, multiply it by 2, and that'll give me a diameter, and then I multiply that by pi, that'll give me the circumference. That's why this other formula works all the time as well. Circumference equals 2 pi r. And in fact, if you get confused by diameters and radiuses, you know that for all of these formulas we'll be seeing with circles, radius always works. Diameter is sometimes something you need, but you can always have a formula that involves a radius. So always fall back in the radius if you're ever in doubt. Now let's see it in action here. Here I've got an example where I'm not given the diameter, I'm just given the radius, but it's not going to be too complicated, right? I'm just going to use, again, a formula. I can use the one I did before, circumference equals pi times the radius, but since in this case I have a radius rather than diameter, I should have said before pi times the diameter, since I have a radius instead of a diameter, I do 2 times pi times the radius. That's my formula I'm going to use here. Right, 2 times pi times the radius. So once I have a formula, in order to make use of it, I just got to put in the things that I know. In this case, I know the radius is 75. So my formula gives me circumference equals 2 times pi times 75. And then since pi is just a number, here on this side, all I've got is numbers. I've got to put into my calculator. I can do the calculation on this right away. I do 2 times pi times my radius, 75, and that'll give me my answer here. 471.238, blah, 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 blah. Since it's 38, that means I have to round this to 471.24 centimeters is my diameter here. Sorry, my circumference here. So I can write that in right away. Circumference equals 471.24, was it? Centimeters. Let me just make sure I have that right. Circumference equals 471.24 centimeters. That is right. Good. That means that I can go in here and circle my answer safely, knowing that I got the right answer. Okay. Now this one, you can see as well how this is going to work, right? I've got a radius, and I want to find the circumference. That's what the question's asking. So I just use the formula. And I'm going to use the formula, circumference equals 2 times pi times the radius. So let's get going on that one. Circumference equals 2 times pi times my radius. Right? That's the formula I want to use. And in this case, once I know the formula I'm going to use, I've put in what I know. I know the radius is 12, so I can rewrite it like this. Circumference equals 2 times pi times 12. I get out my calculator for the calculations. 2 times pi times 12 will give me my answer, 75.398. That's going to come out to 75.40. So I type in 75.4 centimeters is my circumference for this one. All right, so far so good. We've been doing circumference here, and it seems like, wow, this circles unit isn't too complicated after all. Well, that's why we want to add a little bit more, because you guys are too smart to find this stuff particularly difficult. So we got to maybe move you on to something a little bit more challenging. Let me just get this one out of the way.